Hello folks, and welcome to Real Estate Q&A. I am your host, Greg Delane, and on our show we answer frequently asked questions that are either I've heard over the years in my real estate business, and we try to get experienced people on the show to get to the answers that we have. Now, I've always said experience is the difference. Today on my show, I am pleased to have a gentleman on the show. His name is Richard Mecca. And we're going to go right to him, and he can tell you a little bit about himself. Hello, Rich.
Hello, Craig.
How are you?
Very good. Thank you, sir.
All right. A little bit about yourself, Rich, how long you've been in this business and what your position is now at White Plains.
Well, I started in this business shortly after high school. I joined the local union 501, which is now Local 3, as an apprentice. Went through my 4-year apprentice program. Then I was out in the field as a journeyman electrician. Also, I ended up being a foreman and a general foreman on some projects here in Westchester. Around 1984, I wanted to become a contractor. So I got my license, and in 1985, I became an electrical contractor. Left the union and opened a business called Mecca Electric. Happened to live in Rye, so I was formed and I did my business.
Are you still in Rye now?
Well, I sold my business. I had to sell that to pursue other things.
Okay.
So I sold that 5 years ago, although there is still a company that bought the name and the assets out of Rye, New York. When I sold the business in 2002, I became an electrical inspector for the New York Board of Fire Underwriters. That's a private, nonprofit, statewide organization that does electrical inspections for municipalities. New York State, when they created all these codes, left out electrical inspections, and they allowed the local municipalities to hire what they call third-party inspectors. And that's what the New York Board of Fire Underwriters did for many, many years. Nonprofit agency underwritten by insurance companies for their protection as well as the homeowners. Their mission was protection of life first, property second. I went from being an inspector to a senior inspector, and then I left there as a chief electrical inspector before I joined the Village of Mamaroneck as an assistant building inspector. Kind of to round out my career, I spent a year doing all other types of inspections, concrete footings, foundation walls, plumbing, framing, as well as electrical.
Wow.
I left the Village of Mamaroneck to come to White Plains in December of '06, so I've been here 14 months now.
Wow. Wow. Now, you say you right out of high school.
Yes, sir.
You got into the electrical business.
Yes.
Was this something that your family had done before? I mean, how does somebody just say, I want to be an electrician?
Well, even growing up as a kid, I was always handy. I was very hands-on. I would build things. I built my own bicycle at age 13, for example. And my father recognized that I might be good in the trades. Now, he was in the trades. He was a union electrician, and although they encouraged, I'm one of 6, they encouraged all of us to go to college, I broke away from that mold and I says, I want to be an electrician. Okay. So I applied to the union apprenticeship program right after high school, and I got in shortly thereafter. And
wow,
that was the start of the rest.
That's great. How now when you sold your business, and the question is, and got on the other side. Well, it's not really the other side, but the people who govern the electricians, that's the code enforcement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And being on one side for so long, and now working on the other side, can you see why certain code enforcement people were like all over the electricians to make sure it was done correctly? And
well, yes, I can. And I promised myself that I would be the type of electrical inspector that I wanted when I was a contractor. Hey. Someone that would explain when something was wrong, why we did it wrong, where you can find as a reference to correct it and to be better next time. Someone who would take the time instead of just barking out orders, you failed, call me later. Yeah. So yes, being a contractor and being treated poorly by the electrical inspectors, I promised myself that on the other side, I'm not going to do that. So I tend to take great pride in trying to teach everybody that I encounter that has a problem, this is what you did wrong and why.
That's a great answer. I have always said in the real estate business that I sell the same way I want to be sold to.
Yes.
You know, it's really annoying for me to go somewhere and a guy's giving me all these closing questions, and I say, look, I'm in sales. Please don't do that. You know, and if I can afford to buy this, I can afford not to. I know if I want to buy a refrigerator, just, you know, but the kid will say, do you want a blue one or a white one, you know? All right, let's get to the questions.
Sure.
Okay. What are some of the tips for our audience about keeping their homes safer when it comes to electrical stuff? Now, I see you have a lot of stuff, and this is really our show with the people that are out here looking, and I want them to get as much information as possible. What should we talk about first?
Well, we can talk about this one first. This is an example of a loose connection in someone's circuit for a dryer. And what's important to note about this is the amount of damage, the extensive burn in there, did not trip the circuit breaker. And what I try to explain to homeowners more than anything, how hot does your toaster get? It gets red hot.
Yes.
That element gets red hot. Does it trip the circuit? The answer is no. So this got red hot, so to speak, without tripping the circuit, because it's what we would call a high resistance fault.
Okay.
And when I found this in someone's house, I was appalled and relieved that the burn didn't extend further into the house and cause a fire.
Into the wall.
So this is an example of loose connection and how hot it can get without tripping a circuit breaker.
Now, this might be a real dumb question.
No
but
such
listen,
thing when it comes to electrical.
I was in a house the other day, a foreclosure that I'm handling, that had this in here. These old fuses, are there still a lot of them out there?
Yes, there are. There are a lot of fuses. Now, fuses were very common from Edison's time to about shortly after the Korean War, about 1955, 56. The industry started switching over to circuit breakers.
Yes.
And on this board over here, I have some old technology fuse holders and a new technology circuit breakers.
Yes.
So if you have a fuse system like this, my guess it's probably as old as I am.
Okay. All right.
Which is kind of old and needs to be checked up on.
So so certainly any new homes built in the last 15 years don't have this in them.
Correct. They would not have that.
Okay, but if a house was built in 1945, you might see this downstairs. If they haven't upgraded their electricity, you would see this downstairs?
Exactly. You would see that and the fuses in their panel from the 40s.
Now, it's still legal.
Oh, it's still legal, and it might still be safe. The question is, how do you know? If you were to design a product today, can you give a guarantee it'll work effectively 50 years from now?
No.
Well, and that's what that's what the people who have wiring put in the 40s are being asked to evaluate. Something is 55, almost 60 years old. How effective or how safe is it?
Yeah.
And you can't just say it's unsafe. You don't want to scare people.
Yeah.
But it does need to be checked.
I'm looking at this, the coating over this, and I see that in some of the old houses. They don't even have that today. They don't.
Correct. This is a cloth-covered wire, and underneath this is rubber. They thought rubber was a good insulator after World War II. And the problem with rubber is it oxidizes. It deteriorates. It actually deteriorates faster than they ever imagined post-World War II. And the rubber has been replaced by wiring today that is thermoplastic.
Okay.
Okay, now we're thinking that this thermoplastic with a nylon coating should last 50 years, but it's a stretch to guarantee it for 50 years. Just like we thought the rubber was the better insulation over the original cloth and wax wire that was from Edison's time.
I got a question I'm sure everybody out there is thinking of right now. If this is the kind of wiring I have through my house with the cloth, with the rubber up under it, and I decide after seeing this show, I'm going to upgrade my electric because I don't want this to happen. If I put in a new big panel with the circuit, the switches, and can this carry that kind of power now? Do I have to change the wires in the walls too, or what am I doing?
It's actually a 2 or even a 3-step process. By changing your panel board to circuit breakers, you are going to make them more convenient. Circuit breakers are much easier to turn on and off than sticking your fingers in and replacing a fuse. But it doesn't do anything about the wiring in the walls. The advantage of a circuit breaker is it can't be tampered with. The problem with this particular fuse holder is it fits the same size whether it's 15 amp, 20 amp, or 30 amp. So if you have a wiring system designed for 15 amp and the fuse blows, people go and they buy a 30 amp thinking, well, it fits. So that's danger number one with fuses. You don't know if the wire has been overloaded by people putting in a larger size fuse. Circuit breakers will prevent that from happening. They're harder to replace, and they are designed with a thermal and a magnetic function to it. The thermal senses the overload and the magnetic senses the short circuit. So that's the advantage of putting in circuit breakers, but it's not a complete job unless you change the wiring.
Now, Richard, you're currently an instructor of adult education at BOCES, National Electric Code.
Yes, sir.
Because you sound like a teacher. You're teaching. This is great. This is great. Now, are these two things the same? What is this compared to what that is?
Well, this is an example of what I do as an inspector. This is an example of what can go wrong.
Okay.
In here, we've had, I'm not sure if you can see it, but this circuit was overloaded and kept blowing the fuses. Someone thought, I'll just solder a piece of copper wire around the fuse link and I won't blow the circuit, which is correct. That solder wire won't melt until the temperature reaches maybe 80 or 90 amps, although that's a 30 amp fuse for 30 amp wiring. So this is what we do as inspectors. We look for things like this and say, okay, it's unsafe, it's very dangerous, because you're not addressing the problem, and you'll never interrupt the circuit if a problem does develop. And I just thought that was a good way of showing you need a good eye to see that. They could have turned those fuses around, and then we might not have noticed it, but for some reason, someone, I guess, wanted to get caught. I'm not sure why they would do that.
I kind of believe it wouldn't have got past you.
No, not if I'm going to open up and I'm going to see. Here's an example of newer wiring and the older wiring. So there's, it looks like it might have been going to either a range or maybe a dryer or something of that nature.
Richard, when I was a kid, I remember my uncles putting a penny in the, or was that the same kind of, because the penny was copper.
Yes, that's the same type of theory as putting the piece of wire around the fuse is like putting a penny behind the fuse. It takes the thermal element of the fuse out of play. So now the melting rating of the circuit is the copper penny, not the thermal element in the fuse.
I'm telling my age now. I'm sure you haven't seen a copper penny in one of these things.
Oh, we have, yes.
Really?
Yes, we have. I have not seen one in White Plains, but I have seen them in other inspections.
Now, when you owned your electrical company, Mecca Electrical,
yes,
did you just do residential or did you do commercial?
I did a little of everything. I did residential, commercial. The Rice City Schools was an account of mine. The YMCA, some of the churches. I did everything. I tried to do everything in the town that people would call me to come do. Tried.
All right. Now, the problems that you're looking for, do you see them more in residential homes, or do commercial businesses try to get creative too?
Mostly residential, although some commercial businesses are trying to start up on a shoestring, and they're bringing in contractors who aren't familiar with Westchester's rules and regulations. And you have to keep a sharp eye for that. You have to kind of see who the contractor is.
The electrical contractor has to be licensed to do work in Westchester, doesn't he?
Yes, they do, but the licensing going back, let's see, the counties had licensing now for, I think, 12 years.
Okay.
Before that, it was municipality by municipality. And they weren't always very diligent in making sure the person they were giving the license to was really qualified.
Okay.
And we have a lot of contractors coming up from New York City. They're not used to inspectors. Now in Westchester, we have inspectors who inspect everything. It's something you pay for and you take out a permit. In the city, they don't have quite as many inspectors, and they have a real shortage of electrical inspectors. A lot of times you get to sign off on your own work. I certify that the work I installed is to code. So when they come to Westchester doing commercial work, they're not used to the fact I'm going to come, open things up, look behind, get on a ladder, get on my knees, do what I need to do for a thorough inspection.
So when they see you, they say, "Oh no, it's Richard." Oh no.
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah, well, you know, it's all for people's safety.
Right. But at that point, my job is not to yell at them, punish them, but to correct them and say, we are on the New York State Building Code. We have a sample here of the building code and then the residential code. And it's to bring to their attention that these are statewide codes. When you leave New York City, no matter where you go in New York State, we're all enforcing the same code.
Okay.
All of us. So we try to be consistent. So once you educate them that, well, when you're in Westchester, it's a state code. This is where you can look for your reference. Then the next time they come, they're going to do a better job.
It's tough with these people that have been in the business 50 years and you can't tell them anything and they look at you
I
like
hear that all the time. I've been doing it this way for
I mean, what do you think? Come on. You're just making another way to make a paycheck and you're bothering me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so then how do you feel about, I went down to Home Depot and I certainly bought me a 3-2-1 electrical book that shows simple things, how to repair. Should they be selling those kind of things if they're telling people, yeah, you can put in a 3-way switch?
I have no problem with you trying to understand how my industry works. I have a problem with you trying to do what my industry says you need a licensed person to do. By picking up the book and educating yourself, I'm all for that. You're protecting yourself from someone who may be not on the up and up. But to actually go out and install, I say no. Westchester County, you need a license. Sorry, you do.
Okay.
To extend a circuit, you need a license. Because I'm going to show you another example of this. Someone needed a 3-wire for a 3-way switch. 3-way switches works at either end of a room.
Turns it off here, turn it on.
You can tell a 3-way switch because it doesn't say on or off. Because there's really no on or off position.
Yes.
That's opposite. So he needed a 3-wire. So he took a piece of 2-wire and taped on it the 3rd leg. And we found this in the wall going from switch to switch. When we stopped and questioned him, because the first thing I would say is, what were you thinking? He says, well, it'll work, won't it? Everything works until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, either it just stops working or it causes a problem, such as a fire or a shock, which can sometimes lead to electrocution. So that's an example of why we'd rather you not do work as a homeowner, because the theory was right. You need, for a 3-way, you need the 3 different conductors, but the application is wrong. So a little bit of knowledge is okay, but don't do your own work.
Well, Richard, we don't mention names on this show, but after the show you can tell me if there's, I need a list of the guys I need to stay away from. Okay. All right. Is there a rule of thumb for replacing electrical things around the house after a certain amount of time? You know, I had said that I'm pretty sure my mom out in California has a extension cord that's probably been being used for like 15 years. And it's behind the couch under some dust, and it works fine, but everything has a expiration date on it.
Correct. Now, extension cords are considered a temporary wiring method. And it's even recognized in the code for that temporary purposes. It's not intended to be a permanent wiring method. What you would need to do in an extension cord is pick it up and look at it. Is it getting cracked? Are the ends frayed? Are the plugs in the male and the female end loose? Those are things that you would need to check with an extension cord. An example of what you can do around your house is, here's a switch, and I don't know if you can hear it, but it's a snap switch.
Yes.
Now, snap switches themselves went out a very long time ago. Most switches today are silent switches.
See, I did not know
that's a
that.
mechanical device. Regardless of the wiring in the walls, if you have a switch that does this, it's pretty old. I would recommend replacing it with a quiet switch.
Do they still sell those at a place?
I haven't
like
seen one. That's why I'm using an old one I had to take from somebody's house. I haven't seen one brand new.
Okay.
Another example is, I'll have to lift this board up here.
Sure.
Is if you have an old style plug like this.
Okay.
Okay. This was changed by the code in 1963. Now that's what, 44 years ago, 45 years ago, to this style with a ground hole.
What's the difference?
This is a grounding receptacle. This is a non-grounding receptacle.
Can you see that? Okay.
So if you have this type in your house, it's 50 years old. My suggestion is change it over to this, because these are mechanical. These will break down faster than the wiring in the wall will break down.
Now, when you
just
say,
by repeated use, the contacts lose their tensile strength. So those two things, replacing switches and receptacles, is a good update. Now, while you're doing it, or while your electrician is doing it, they can better advise you how the shape of the wiring behind the walls, whether it's still in good shape or if it has started to deteriorate. So that's the first step.
well, as soon as you said change those, the first thing that came to my mind is, where's my 3-2-1 book that I got? And you're not talking about me changing them. You're talking about me calling in an electrician to change them.
Well, Westchester County law would allow you to change your own switches and receptacles.
Can you say that louder so my wife can hear that?
But White Plains does not allow it.
Okay, all right.
Certain other municipalities may have local laws prohibiting that.
Yeah.
Okay, but Westchester County says that's maintenance. You could do that. It's
Okay.
not extension. Extension of the wiring is when you're actually adding a wire from a box to a box. For that you need an electrical license.
All right.
Now, because of the age of the wiring, if you're changing it out, I would strongly recommend you use an electrician, because he's the one to advise you whether the wire has started to deteriorate.
Got another question here. You conduct annual safety inspections of laundromats, auto body shops, and repair shops, and businesses with cabaret license.
Yes, we do.
Okay. How often do you do these?
Well, it's an annual inspection, and for example, the cabaret license, there's quite a few establishments in White Plains that are allowed to have live entertainment. And the city feels that we need to give them a little extra inspection to ensure the safety of the patrons. And what I look for, I only come once a year, but I look for extension cords, which sometimes people use. They add audio equipment and they'll use an extension cord, or improper use of overhead lighting for the dance stuff. And I also check for any possible extensions, or look in the bar underneath, any type of wiring that may cause a problem. Because you can imagine what would happen if you had a little bit of smoke late at night at a place loaded with people. So we can't always prevent that by being proactive and saying, look, once a year we're going to come in and we're going to make this electrical inspection. Puts the cabaret owners on notice that White Plains, for example, is serious about the protection of its patrons.
Can it get your place closed down if you?
I'm not sure, because they've been so cooperative. The business owners really want this, and if we come in and say you need to do this or that, they do it right away. So haven't been around long enough to know of anybody who'd want to fight me on that.
Well, it's my understanding after years in this business of real estate that the town is here to work with you.
Correct.
And it's not like a I got you kind of situation. Here's my situation, and a lot of people tell me, well, when I bought it, it was like that. You're the one responsible for it today, and if the town comes out, if you call and say, look, Richard, I need you to come out and take a look at what's going on here, help me to process what I need to do, I think it works out better for everybody.
Well, that's what we try to be. We try to be proactive and say the codes were not made in a vacuum. They're made to fill a need, and the need is safety. Safety of life first, property second. And just about every code we have is backed up by either an incident or some type of reaction to something that has happened. For example, we do laundromats. Why do you do laundromats, you may ask? Because of the amount of lint that may get collected. Laundromat is another example of an appliance that moves a lot. If a washing machine and a dryer vibrate, things loosen up. And people are in there, and they tend to think they're like home, and they relax, not realizing they're in a place where they should be aware, is the dryer acting up? At the same time, they don't own it. So we require them to take out an annual permit. We go and we make an inspection, a safety inspection. We look to see is there accumulation of lint, make sure the exit lights and smoke detectors are working.
Just those things are running constantly.
They're running constantly. They tend to get used or possibly overused.
I think when I was growing up, I may have ruined a couple of them at my mom's house because I had candy bars and maybe a frog in my pocket. If you didn't empty out all my stuff, you would hear it in the. Well, this show went pretty quick. There's one other question I want to ask you. Is there anything, I know during the wintertime, a lot of people tend to use more electricity, and fires get started, and I don't want to say they're electrical fires, but is there anything of safety that you can tell the people what they can do besides what you just showed? You showed some great ideas. Anything that we can tell them that they can look out for?
Well, a lot of our housing stock is older,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not insulated to today's standards. So there tends to be cold spots in houses, and people, or even in apartment buildings, and people like to use electric space heaters.
Yes.
They're allowed, but they can be quite dangerous. Most space heaters, for example, will use 1,500 watts, which is almost a full circuit.
Wow.
Now, we're not sure the age of the wiring, where this is being used, what else is on the circuit, but people don't care. They're cold. They're going to want to plug it in and keep their feet warm or their room warm. My suggestion is that needs further attention than just going to the store and buying it and plugging it in. Circuit may be overloaded. Things may fall onto the space heaters, which is more common than people realize. Close the door, a piece of paper can fall in. As a matter of fact, we had a fire in Rye about 10 years ago just for that reason. The gentleman on the way out closed the door, blew some papers off his desk, and just happened to fall right inside the space heater. So
Well,
that needs to be looked at.
Richard, we're wrapping up the show. Thank you so much. And
Pleasure.
I think I have enough time. I got my 4 questions. Everybody on the show. All right. Favorite sport?
Golf.
I knew that.
You did?
Okay. Favorite sports team?
I would be the Mets.
The Mets. We
The
just
Mets.
had a guy on here before I came on that did a Mets show.
Oh, yeah, I'll have
Yeah.
to watch that. Okay.
If you could do any profession other than this one, what would it be?
Flying. I would have loved to have been a pilot.
Have you gone to take your flying lessons and want to get involved?
No. Life gets in the way of your dreams sometimes.
Once we leave here, and we're only here for a cup of coffee, how do you want to be remembered?
As someone who had passion for his industry and wanted to teach others that it's a fascinating industry, maybe boring to some, but it is a fascinating industry. Electricity, you can't see it, you can't hear it, but we all need it. And to project to people that it's a good industry, but it has its dangers, and please be careful when you use it. That I would like to be remembered for.
Richard, thank you so much for coming on
My
my
pleasure,
show.
sir.
And we will see everybody next week. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
That's it.